Tung da ga dang da ga dung da da ding tao tung da da dung tang to. Tung da da ding tang tung da da tao tao tung da da ding tang to. Tung da da tao tao tung da da tao tung da ga dung tang tung. Tung da ga dang tam tung da da dang tung di di ding ding tung da ga ding dang da ga dung. Tung da ga ding dang da ga dung. Tung da ga ding dang 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 da ga dung dang 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 da ga dung da ga brang.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Miguel López. I am a curator, writer, and researcher from Lima, Peru. This is where I am now, Peru, Lima. Between 2015 and 2020, I was chief curator and later co-director and chief curator of Teoretica, a visual arts organization devoted to contemporary art from Central America and the Caribbean. I am the moderator of this session of Lumbung Konteks, a series of online conversations that started last year and will continue until June this year. Each session of this series invites two Documenta 15 Lumbung members to introduce, expand, and reflect on each other's practice and their wider ecosystem, share stories, images, and tools for different ways of living and working in community, and discuss the differences and affinities between their contexts. This series addresses the importance of the localities within which we all work, the conditions that inform and ground our practices, and the ways we can learn from each other's models of education, ecology, and economy. In this episode, Lumbung members of Biennale from Budapest and INSTAR, Instituto de Artivismo Hannah Arendt, from La Habana, will discuss their work and context. The 14 Lumbung members of Documenta 15 are collectives and organizations invited by Ruan Grupa and the artistic team to join them in developing a long-term process of sharing resources and cultivating friendship. I want to mention the name of our guests today. Each of them will introduce themselves and their projects. Vasyl Cherepanyn, head of the Visual Culture Research Center and organizer of the Kiev Biennale, special guest today of Biennale. Esther Sakaks from OFF-Biennale. Jaishnalka Somoji from OFF-Biennale. Camila Lobon from INSTAR, and Juliana Ravelo from INSTAR. If you are watching this conversation live, you are invited to post questions in the YouTube chat, questions that we can address at the end of the conversation. If people want to watch this conversation in German, there is currently another live stream on the Documenta 15 YouTube page that has German dubbing. Before start this conversation and giving the microphone to INSTAR, I just wanted to extend to Vasyl and to the Ukrainian people my hope for your safety and my support to your fight. At the time of this conversation, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is close to enter its 4th week. There is a growing movement against the war and Putin's imperial autocracy, but clearly it is still not enough. From where I am now, Lima, Peru, there are many things difficult to follow and understand, but we hear your clear demands for actions to counter the war by any means. I wanted to say thank you, Vasyl, for your presence today in this Lumbung context in the midst of such a horrific situation, and extend my admiration and recognition to your singular and collective fight and work. So we're going to start this first round of presentations with INSTAR, and then the OFF-Biennale will continue, and then Vasyl. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Hi, everybody. I'm Juliana. from Havana. I'm a social researcher, and I'm especially concerned in this intersection between citizenship and art, and also alternative way of education that follows some artistic strategy. So INSTAR, the Institute of Artivism, Hannah Arendt, was found in 2015 by reading this by Hannah Arendt, Origin of the Totalitarianism. This kind of very simple gesture was tried to the government tried to avoid that happen with public works in front of the houses, and this by itself can explain a lot about our context. Tanya has stated that this idea was came out from some conversation with friends, and this is mark or pave a path that we follow in INSTAR. Like we start in conversation with friends, and this very erotic way to share and enjoy the time together in a context that is very hostile with, collaboration, and criminalize all those forms of independent social civil society gatherings. So INSTAR followed this path. First desire, then thinking, and then action. Action in the way, in the sense that Hannah Arendt used to say. It's a new, something that brings something new, something relevant, politically relevant. And in fact, this acronym from the Institute of Artivism, Hannah Arendt, INSTAR, it's a word in Spanish. That means it's kind of a call for action. And when you say INSTAR, you are already evoking this poetic, like you are calling for action, and you are calling for civil awareness, and try to change in this way your context. Always being creative and try to be innocent when you face like hostile circumstances. So I think Camila can follow this introduction with some concrete method we use during our works.
Thank you for having us in this space. Well, yeah, as Juliana was saying, the very beginning of the Institute is an example of the challenges we have to face in these years we have been working. We both started working in INSTAR in 2019, and when we start in the project, the Institute opened a whole program. We have a very broad program of civic action and for support through the utility of art as a political and as a civic tool to create awareness in society. No, INSTAR has a very broad project. We maintain a pedagogical project of workshops we call Academica. We have a whole award program for support cinema, independent art, independent journalism, historical research, rescue the archive of Cuban civil society, residencies programs for activists in vulnerable situations, humanitarian work. We have been trying to add on all those spaces in society when we can get when we can open new spaces for democracy, no? And yeah, that's the thing. So in Cuba, we have been suffering for 60 years a dictatorship. Actually, right now, we are experiencing one of the most critical and sad historical moments, I think, because last July 11, there was like a social outbreak. There was massive manifestations on the streets asking for freedom, asking for food, screaming down with the dictatorship. And right now, and somehow INSTAR has been part of that civic society from artistic area who has been leading and inspiring this social awareness, the importance of stand for human and civic and political rights, which is something which has been possible because people has internet, because time is changing, and of course the country is, I think, getting into the 21st century, and people has been realized all the rights they don't have, no. And right now we are in a very sad situation because in Cuba there is more than 700 political prisoners, and they are making they are some of them are facing excessive sentence up to 30 years just for go to the street and manifestate and fight for their own freedom and rights. So all this work I have been talking about we do in the institute might seem easy, but actually in a context of such precariousness and restrictions in which, I don't know, getting rights can be an odyssey, a very hard thing. It requires a great effort, a great emotional and psychological strength to sustain, no? So we have this both challenge. One to maintain our program of action, and the other to keep working and survive the repression of the state. Juliana was showing this example, but I can speak of a very recent one. For example, we were victims of a mediatic campaign from the government, official campaign, uh, in which they actually show documents they had from our email, showing a budget for our project in Documenta, and showing it as if it were a budget from the U.S. State Department and part of the secret plan to overthrow with the government, no, to destroy the government. So this is the kind of thing we have been dealing with, and the project has to adapt every time to the new circumstance because they are all the time creating new strategies of repression. We have been going through a lot of things. They have thrown acid at our door. They have organized acts of repudiation against us in our headquarters. Actually, sometimes our headquarters in Havana has felt as a military headquarters, no? Because have become a space of resistance, having people, officers from the security of state outside, harassment and a threat in us. And the coordinators of INSTAR have been suffering, like myself and Tanya, for example, have been suffering kidnaps on the middle of the streets, cut off our internet access, actually house arrestment, illegal house arrestment for months. And it has been very hard. But I think that precisely for that, because in some point these kind of projects our very existence became a mission itself, no? And resistance became a very important part of give an example and fight for rights and freedom in the social context. Um, we have been able to survive and reinvent ourselves all the time and avoid that point in which the government wants to put us, which is only reacting and not producing. No, they all the time are trying to kidnap your imagination. And our challenge as creators and as activists is precisely to reinvent ourselves and adapt. And I think in that way the institute have been very successful. Each time they have attacked us, we have developed more and more our imagination and creative strategies to survive and to create. And in that way, we have created also a beautiful community, which is, I think, the base of any kind of social justice. No, so yeah, that, I don't know if Liana wants to add something or.
I think we use all the time we had. We can continue later
Yeah.
during the conversation. Gracias, Camila.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Gracias,
Camila,
José.
Julian. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Esther.
Yeah, it worked. Hi, Naka, you are muted. Hi, Naka, we cannot hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we continue. My name is Hajnalka Somogyi. I'm a curator, have worked in the Budapest art scene since 2001. OFF-Biennale Budapest is based at the capital city of Hungary. Hungary is a Central European country. We are part of the so-called ex-Eastern Bloc, ex-socialist bloc, and we joined the European Union in 2004. So let me just say that clearly we are in the safest and most comfortable situation out of the organizations that are represented here today, if we don't count Documenta, of course. So accordingly, probably our methods and our strategies are also different. We started working together in 2014. Our organization was also founded in 2015, just like INSTAR. And my colleagues and I, who started this project, had the wish to create a platform where independent art, critical art practices can be produced and presented also in an international context. It's a small civil organization and an association. We don't have employees. It's a very nomadic endeavor. So one might wonder why in the middle of Europe there's a need for another biennial, right? So yeah, the answer is in the context. Hungary has a quite right-wing populist government who have been in power since 2010, so almost 12 years. The elections are coming up in 3 weeks. And the changes that they introduced in the country, a very strong control of each area of public life, more precisely in the field of culture, a change of leadership, the politically loyal leaders, control, like a centralization, basically, that allowed for the introduction of more and more internalized censorship, divestment in independent culture, and a certain kind of propaganda that stigmatizes civil organizations that still work for for independent culture are the means and methods, I would say, that the government exerts or in Hungary. And so our reaction, our very proactive reaction to this situation was to create our own platform where we can continue working with artists, with certain topics, with certain artistic tendencies that we thought were important and that were not supported by the mainstream institutions. One of the reasons or the main reason the art scene has been so vulnerable to these quite drastic changes that the government introduced, this centralization and strict control, political control, was that as in many of these ex-socialist countries, there was no real alternative to the public art infrastructure or public money in contemporary art. And so basically there was no balance, right? No other resources. So it was very easy to change the art scene dramatically in a few years. And this is the reason why we, from the beginning, decided not to apply for public funding, which sounded pretty crazy in our circumstances because there's hardly anything other than that. But we thought it was important on many levels. Partly, clearly, this is, I mean, obviously it's a political statement, but it's also a practical decision that allows us to avoid all those kind of negative compromises that working with public money entails in here. And finally, a way to kind of look around and see, what else is available and try to establish those connections, those methods that make fundraising sustainable also from other sources, basically to learn how to do it without the state. So I would say that it's less resistance and more resilience in our case. And the civil organization is a very vulnerable but also a very adaptable tool to lead such a project. And I think I will give the word to Esther, who can introduce the three editions that we've done so far, and by that also probably the changes that we introduced throughout all these times in the spirit of this adaptation.
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Esther, and so just to continue on with Hajnaq and maybe just to connect to some of the things that Juliana and Camila mentioned also. So I think reinvention and adaptation, it's also one of the key or are the key words for us too. Of course, as Hajnaq mentioned, we operate in a very different context from Cuba, but also from Ukraine, but we will get to that. So OFF-Biennale is also a flexible structure, and it gives us the opportunity to react whatever is needed or what we feel is needed at the current moment in the Hungarian art scene. And we, as Hajnaq mentioned, we have 3 editions so far in 2015, 2017, and 2021. And so just in terms of the main tactics or the main strategies in these 3 editions. So the first edition was really basically calling everyone, and as Hajnaq often mentions it was a critical mass to bring as many people together as possible and do whatever means available and do whatever it's possible. So in that case, what OFF-Biennale could offer is basically a concerted communication. So that was not so much we could offer in terms of providing venues or funding or those kind of means. But this was the biggest. So the most participants were taking part in this first But then the next edition, we felt that we would need something more to connect all the participants and all the projects taking place in the off-biennial. So we came up with a thematic framework, and the thematic framework was also somehow thematizing what we as off-biennial were trying to do. And we harked back to a historical example, to a children's republic that was formed in Hungary after the Second World War. And within this children's republic, they elected their own government, and they came up with their own kinds of rules and ways of living. And this sort of materialized utopia, it's what also we thought that this describes somehow the working method of the off-biennial. And but then from this step on, so we felt that even the thematic framework is not enough, and what is actually needed is for off-biennial to step up also as a producer of projects, both in terms of financial means, but also in terms of thematic support. And so that's why in the last edition we had 14 complex projects that the off-biennial produced. So it was really important for us in 2021 to realize, and also 2020 in the preparatory phase and the years before that, that we need to support artists and art workers in Hungary to be able to produce projects that wouldn't happen otherwise. And also on this self-organized level, it was also important for us to look out to the region, Eastern Europe, and to look at what other colleagues are doing and to connect. And this is how the East Europe Biennial Alliance in 2019 formed. I mean, it has a longer history to it, but what I would like to point out from this story is that for the East Europe Biennial Alliance compromises beyond it of Biennale Budapest 3 or 4 other biennials. So the Kiev Biennial, Biennale Matter of Art in Prague, Biennale Warsaw, and the Survival Kit Festival Riga. And so all of these biennials are, I mean, the fundings are different, and the context is a little bit different in each case, but all of them are small and fragile, and we all work in a context that, as we have seen time and again, can drastically change from one day to another. But it was a strategic need and wish to support each other that drew up the contours of this biennial alliance, rather than a specific programming agenda or steps. And we really wanted to do something with supporting each other, as we said in our mission statement, quote, to redefine the way culture institutions collaborate, end of quote, to basically lay the foundations for a network of both infrastructural and thematic support. We keep asking the questions how we can help each other in meaningful and immediate ways. And of course, as the invasion of Ukraine happened, and the tension it was visible, the tensions were already building up. Also we asked as the alliance what we can do, but since it's also a self-organized network, our means are very limited, but we wanted to use this platform that we have today to invite Vasyl Cherepanyn from the Kiev Biennial, our ally in this East Europe Biennial Alliance, so that we could share with him this platform and hear and offer him at least this, to hear his opinion and his what's going on currently in Ukraine. And of course, we should state two statements by the East Europe Biennial Alliance condemning the war and expressing our heartfelt solidarity with the Kiev Biennial and also everyone affected by the invasion. And there was just one image, and I would just like to go back to it before inviting Vasyl to speak. That the biggest action today that we managed to do with the with the East Europe Biennial Alliance was co-curating the Kiev Biennial that we titled Allied. And again, in this case, it just actually closed 4 months ago, and in this case, with the thematics of the Allied, we also try to thematize what we were trying to do in a practical, on the level of practice, how we can form alliances in the 21st century. And again, and this, as this conversation was also an invitation to present our local context and to present our ecosystem, and it was also imperative, and it was not a question for us that we need to involve Vasyl in this kind of conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, so I suppose it's my part. So first, thanks so much, Esther and Hajnalka, for having me, and I'm also very thankful to Documenta 15 team and to Lumbung Collective, to Kasia for providing this indeed very, very important platform, because well, first of all, I think it's very it's really indeed crucial at this moment of time to use any possible opportunity to voice those war urgencies that we are basically facing for the time. And yeah, my name is Vasyl Cherepanyn. Together with the colleagues, we are running a Social Culture Research Center, which was established in 2008. And since 2015, an institutional organizer of the Kyiv Biennial. And also 3 years ago, we co-founded the East Europe Biennial Alliance together with colleagues from OFF-Biennale Budapest and others from Warsaw and Prague, as Esther already mentioned. So I would basically like to use, indeed, very, very grateful for this. It's every voice and every opportunity counts and is super valuable. There is no doubt about that. I would basically like to use the opportunity not to, of course, not to describe any kind of projects that we have conducted since the start or whatever, because it's basically, yeah, what is important to take into account that our previous world has already finished, right? I don't, to be honest, even remember how we lived this full-scale invasion on 24 February. We've already for these 3 weeks we've adjusted ourselves so much to live bombardments and in the bomb shelters, and anti-raid sirens became our constant soundtrack, with which we go to sleep and with which we what is important also for us institutionally is basically that from the very start of this full-scale war, because the Russian invasion into Ukraine and occupation of the Ukrainian territories basically started 8 years ago in 2014 after the Maidan uprising. But actually, since the beginning of this full war, what was actually the biggest surprise, not only for us, but for us in Ukraine, but in general, that nobody basically expected the Second World War style of war. So first, it was like meant to be a kind of a really special operation, which totally failed, and then it started to be like Grozny or Aleppo style war. But now this is really unprecedented since 1945, and this is not an exaggeration, it's not a metaphor, because basically what we are facing from the Russian military side was really directly taken from the Nazi playbook, from the Second World War playbook. So there is, in this sense, I'm speaking like within the framework of the cultural event. Obviously, we don't have any cultural field in sociological sense anymore. We all lost our professions. Some of them already lost our homes and, of course, former lives. But some of many thousands already lost their lives. Just a day yesterday, actually, or a day before yesterday, I got a message from my colleague in Kiev, with whom we collaborated a lot. Basically, maybe Esther, you could meet her in Kiev last year when you were here at the Biennial, who actually said that her house in the Kiev suburb was bombarded, and so she luckily escaped before. But as an institution, as a kind of a cultural activist, whatever you call it, so there were like several waves of our activities throughout these 3 weeks, and we actually, in that regard, I would like a couple of points, or to touch several aspects which I think are structural ones for the art international field, and also for the institutions operating in that field, because we have been like fighting for various causes, especially those who stayed here in Ukraine, or those who managed to flee the country. And basically, first of all, it was we launched an emergency support initiative aiming at gathering funds to help those who stayed in Ukraine and being in various regions of the country under different conditions, but also try to also support a bit those activist-based collectives who are, for instance, at the moment are concentrating on documenting Russian war crimes in Ukraine. So they are gathering basically mostly video and photo evidences from various public and private sources, as well as those initiatives which are also helping with evacuating some museum collections and artworks and stuff. But also on the international front, so to say, because we are all on the battlefield. It just it varies much, but we are all at this kind of on the war front. So we have been also fighting, and we did gain some results in that regard. Also in collaboration with different international institutions in the West predominantly, also trying, but that out a bit, I think, we got success trying to convince the others to also to join the boycott of the Russian institutions in the cultural and art field, because none of them actually took a public political stance and even call the war a war, and couldn't even name the aggressor, just referring abstractly to some human tragedy unfolding in Ukraine, which is total bullshit, of course. But also we were trying to make a kind of collective to convince other institutions as well as collectives to join the typical Ukrainian appeals at the moment, which is aimed at the Western governments to help to support the Ukrainian appeal to help to provide for Ukraine as substantial military aid, required to stop the aggressor and to join this claim with regards to closing the sky, which is super urgent because we are losing hundreds of lives every day, I mean civilians. And at the moment when I am speaking right now, I am just reading the news that we basically are now also preparing the invasion from the Belarusian side, meaning that the Belarus regular army is supposed to join the Russian army and attack Ukraine from the north. So it's already becoming totally surreal that it's not only Russia, but also Belarus, and also as the Russian military are also involving Syrian Assad forces into this. So you have a kind of a consortium of different armies attacking one country for no actual reason. And actually, our Western partners are just observing how we are being exterminated at the moment. So, but I think that this situation poses really several important questions, because as I've been working institutionally and personally in the cultural field, like for years and years already, for more than 15 years, but also I think that especially in this very disastrous context, to put it softly, that became a kind of a moment of truth. It's especially important to pose this, because I think so. I wouldn't go like into ethics, or I wouldn't like to moralize or to convince anybody, or trying to appeal to some consciousness or whatever. I don't think this is necessary. And on the one hand, on the other hand, I also wouldn't like to overestimate the role of the cultural field and their pressure on the political field, respectively. So I have no illusions in that regard, of course. I think that this is very much about the way how international art field is operating, how it has been structured, and whether we need this or not. And maybe documenta is a good context to this. Because I think, well, from my experience again, but also as for in collaboration with other institutions. By the way, I have to also to express my thankfulness to the Internazionale network of museums who supported a lot like this Ukrainian case, and they also issued several petitions, and also were support, especially from the Polish side, supporting really a lot in this regard. So I'm really very, very thankful to them. So it's not just some discursive solidarity, but real support, I mean. So what we have encountered so far in this regard, I think that in terms of the culture predominantly, is basically that which was also true like before this full-scale invasion, right? But I think especially in this context, it became especially evident that on the one hand you have sort of really big sort of elephant-like institutions in the West, right, in the art and cultural field, which are very hard to be approached. So if they are, so they this is this kind of a typical, as they call it in Germany, Scholzomat style, right? That they are listening to you, they express some solidarity and some support, but then they are thankful to you, and then they get to their business as usual. So they basically, they are very much disturbed and deep hurt. We know this very well, and I'm not. So let me put it clear that. Of course, without this solidarity and humanitarian support, the country and the field here wouldn't survive. So this is super important. But at the same time, what is really striking for me that even those really big institutions, which are totally protected, right, that you cannot have any doubts the way they operate, and they always claim, like we have been always claiming, that we are politically involved and socially engaged. But when it comes to practice, they just are not going to trespass any boundaries they have, be it imaginary boundaries or some practical financial boundaries, I don't know. So, but pretty often they are just trying to keep their own line, which is obvious, of course, but at the same time they are not capable of acting in a practical manner, even in some possible statements, or so they feel restricted in their way, but at the same time, of course, they are like foundational agents of the field, right? So most of the rest of the field is basically also orientating towards them and to figure out their own political approaches in that regard. On the other hand, I think what we also encountered, there are those like numerous collectives which are horizontally structured. They are not so much centralized. Of course, they are opposite in a way to those big institutions. They are like horizontally structured. So, and it also somehow creates the circumstances in which it's just impossible to come to any conclusion, because they are just continuously discussing and trying to figure out what to do next. There are, of course, myriad of opinions, and actually, you cannot get any even practical outcome from this kind of collaboration or in this kind of communication, just because these discussions can like take really a long run, and we here just don't have time for this, really speaking practically, because I'm sure we will here all be white totally, and these collectives will be still discussing and talking about their positions and what is the most appropriate one and so on. So I think that these kind of two approaches, this institutionalized centralized one and this horizontal collective one, are somehow the opposite ones, but at the same time they are sort of supporting each other. They are basically two sides of the coin. That basically all the structurally that the whole field is operating accordingly. And unfortunately, well, throughout my sort of institutional experience, I basically encountered only a few institutions which were ready to reorient themselves to take a different stance in such senses, and who were like practically ready to trespass their boundaries, their sort of imaginary borders, and to act in accordance to the new realities which arrived, which were imposed on us, as well as on other countries, like that all those participants here are representing respectively. But the problem for me is that pretty often, like especially like dealing with these mostly Western European institutions, because in the East, I'm here also referring to the East Euro-Biennial Alliance, which has a bit different practice, luckily. But most of the Western-based European institutions, they really, yeah, I have to put it bluntly, because they really remind me, you know, like these aquarium fishes. They are super nice, beautiful when they are in their waters. But if you take them out, they are just not capable to survive in the real outside world. They can only in their bubble. And we know very well that in this bubble, in this absolutely protected and autonomous and professionalized art field in the West, we know very well that almost everything is allowed. Everybody is super political, super engaged. But when you step out of this field, of this sort of golden cage, of this art zoo, so to say, they're not capable and not ready for anything, just because they don't have instrument. They cannot even imagine how to survive in other circumstances. So I think this is really a fundamental structural problem that the art field currently has. And so in this sense, I have been never up to some, you know, of radical revolutionary chic games. I know lots of people or lots of institutions who are playing those games in their respective countries somewhere in the West. I have been never interested in that because I have a different life and only one life. But I also think that if we really think internationally, seriously, not just playing around, we have to question this and to challenge this. I'm not sure whether this modus operandi of the international art field is a proper one, especially when we are facing a totally different world, really, not only in Ukraine, not only in Europe, but globally. So I think this is really a very important question, because this kind of institutional behavior, of course, based on the dirty laundering money, on the money washing, on the oligarchic approaches, on these patronages supported by the states, and on the respective governments, who, as we know, is like the German one, who was feeding the Russian aggressor for years and years. Let's put it openly, because that is true. So I think this is very problematic, right? And another thing I think, which is for me is very important, and I have always had a greatest respect towards documenta. I think this is like really unlike Daniel. This is really a very, very important endeavor in political sense, in the ideological sense. And also in this context, I'm thinking in that regard, in the sense that how documenta emerged, right? Not only the previous edition, the documenta 14, but from the very beginning, what are the documenta's roots, right? Because it became possible, obviously, as art field after the Second World War, and in general other structural institutions in the EU, just because the principal anti-Nazi stance, right? And what we are facing today is basically, as I said, is taken from the Nazi playbook. They are just reversing it. It's not where the aggressors are speaking about denazification. They are using words like genocide, because that is exactly what they are doing in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, in Chernihiv, in the north of, and so on. They are bombarding everything just without any borders, just everything really what they can reach out to. They are also using city blockades when people, like hundreds, thousands of people, are in hunger. Literally, like people are dying because of hunger, because of this blockade. So I mean that this is clearly what we are facing. It's not even a pejorative term already. This is like already discussed by key international thinkers, philosophers, and sociologists. Because what we face from the Russian side is basically a fascist military dictatorship, with all the outcomes possible you can imagine. Even cannot, as we cannot also still even here, because it's still in so, and I'm also in this regard thinking that maybe this 15th edition of documenta, I obviously I know that there were lots of preparations already done, but I think that this documenta could serve as a kind of new starting point, perhaps, in terms of questioning the way how the in general cultural field in the West operates, and in the West and beyond, but also questioning and challenging those ideological issues which are very much based in the European history, in the German history, in documenta's institutional history, right? And I think this would be a really a great chance to do something in practice in that regard, to change, because it's even not about this NATO approach or the US approach or the EU approach, but it's rather that if we surrender the field, or in general the context in Ukraine, you basically surrender everything you have, right? You're surrendering Nazi Europe, you are surrendering your countries, your field, the way you live, the way you would like to live. So I think that I would just like to address you with this claim, sort of, let's use this chance, right? Let's not miss this, because perhaps we won't have another one. So I am still able to speak to you right at the moment. I don't know whether I will have another, possibility and opportunity to do this. But let's use this chance collectively and really in a practical way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank to all for the presentations, and thank you, Vasyl, what you are feeling and thinking from Ukraine. That is a battlefield, and for sharing the demands from the Ukrainian people to counter the aggression. I think it is really important to hear you. I think we can open the conversation now. Actually, Vasyl, how to challenge those operandi of the global art field, and I think that is also related to thinking how are we using the cultural capital of institutions and projects in a situation like this. And after hearing Esther, Jaslanka, Camila, and Juliana, I feel that there are many powerful connections between OFF-Biennale and INSTAR. I mean, you are both operating in the context of increasingly authoritarian governments, operating without or explicitly refusing, in the case of Biennale, refusing state support and working through self-finance and self-organized infrastructures. So I think you are both looking for new ways and critical art practices in public spaces, as Juliana said, and of course facing in different degrees, of course, forms of censorship. So yeah, I think it is important to think what can we do in this kind of circumstances, what forms of solidarity are possible to activate. I mean, it is of course difficult to answer, especially in after hearing what Vasyl shared, and of course the situation presented by OFF-Biennale and INSTAR are totally different from the one Vasyl is living right now. But I think it will be to think about or to continue thinking about tools and strategies. Some of them were already presented. Tools to face persecution and repression, or maybe ask you about the reception of these projects in your context. I mean, how they were and trying to connect that with Vasyl was talking about how we are opposing extermination. Who would you like to start?
Well, I can start. It's very hard to talk after Vasyl said to us. But yeah, it's for us. It's like we can actually face this super big monster, and we try to concentrate in create small laboratories for face, like the amnesia. The government want us to that we forget everything that we have this different front, like we give the tool for describe what is happening to us, because many authors and that was the foundational gesture in INSTAR, that this author that published this book about totalitarianism, that was even published before or launched before the Cuban Revolution started, it's forbidden, it's unpublished. So just reading that is very disruptive gesture. So we continue that with this, like bringing and fostering like independent civil society insertion in the international context, because which is a political experiment and every Cuban are happy, but here some Cuban wants to be like just same like the rest of the humankind and have pretty much the same ambitions and wants to exchange and standardize the relationship we have with abroad Cuba. And we try to do this, of course, in like super baby step micro laboratories, and we start to exercise what democracy looks like, what institutional transparency looks like, what a fair salary could be, what nice conversation, how can happen nice conversation without trying to reach the consensual, like for every means. We can stand with difference, we can like be comfortable with dissent, and also produce art, produce knowledge, produce internal communication, external communication without the state mediation, and at the same time, kind of we are not trained for that. So it's like everyday training and everyday facing new conditions. Yeah, I can kind of understand what OFF-Biennale is also going through, because it's pretty much our context. So it's probably the next step is this, what we are doing now, which is talk each other and try to go out these our very own bubbles, and yes, try to maybe globally, even when being located and embody our own ideas, our own desires, and our action, and expand this body human scale. But yeah, try to now make other kind of connections that is, like the whole world kind of experiment, what we experiment in INSTAR, which is we were losing our bodies. It's like the government restrain you like every time more and more and more and more, and we have to go virtual in some point. And now we are spread in the whole world, and we are trying to figure out how this molecular body works, how we organize, and here we are finding new companions in this. I don't want the war fight. I kind of like more like re-existence, or this new form of existence. Well, that's it for my part.
I think Juliana was very clear. I cannot, it was very emotive for me to hear Vasyl. I cannot, of course, apologize in behalf of the Cuban government, which official statement is support Putin and actually present him as a victim of the US imperialism and support the invasion to Russia. I won't apologize for that, because it's not my government. It's a dictatorship, exactly like Putin, which works as an authoritarian, totalitarian government, and as a small tropical imperialism who has do the same thing in whole Latin America, for example, with Venezuela. So it's a very sad context, and the people who is and have been victims of this system, we know how abandonment, international abandonment, and loneliness feels. We have been for 60 years suffering this same loneliness, this same slow, dead, peaceful state of internal war, no? And it is very complicated. There is not a solution in our work as activists, peaceful activists, and artists. We have somehow a limited field of action, but as citizens, we need to find the way of create international structures that prevent humanity of this kind of system. We have to do that, because obviously the cruelty and the authoritarianism of this kind of government, as Putin, as the Cuban dictatorship, can be not approved. It is not possible to allow this kind of criminal power to exist, and we have to find the ways to strengthen democratic structures all over the world in order to get to this point in which solution is only violence. No, so yeah, all my solidarity, and I don't know, this is a huge subject we have still pendant as humanity, as society internationally.
Yeah, agreeing with Camila and Juliana. I've been thinking about what Vasyl said about the impotence of the system, and how most of the political content remains in the symbolic field. And I've been also thinking about, like, you know, why we are here now and speaking about all these strategies, and basically the fact that these small civil organizations that operate in circumstances less favorable than the mentioned obvious Western examples. What is obvious is that as a difference is that our political actions are not only symbolical, right? So our political operations are at least partly in the real political field, and that creates a difference, and it creates a different kind of starting point or understanding. But on the other hand, I mean, what Vasyl was talking about is bare life, and of course, your first reaction is to help as, you know, as just like a citizen, obviously, as we've been trying to do that. But then, do you abandon your profession, or do you see a way of using this network, or you using this art system, impotent as it is right now, to be able to help or affect some change? So yeah, just exactly as Vasyl said, is there a way to, you know, consciously use this, what we have? Because we, as like a loosely networked art scene, do have assets, do have skills, do have what's the word? I'm sorry. Resources, right? So I imagine that any kind of conscious, concerted action must start with consciously, like, reassessing what we have, like what are the specificities of this art scene, and what are the things that are usable. Obviously, we also have to set some goals, right? I don't really believe in statements that much. I think statements are important to, I don't know, keep the spirit, or to just communicate with each other, and it's important. But in terms of political effectiveness, I don't think that even the strong players of the art scene are in a situation to really put pressure to these structures. So the other big question, besides of what we have, is like, yeah, what we can do, not only to prevent. Yeah, I think that's the question that has been more the forefront of our operations, like how to nurture the democratic discourse, how to raise awareness, civil awareness in this society. So that's something that we've been thinking about, but also like, yeah, how to help in these situations where prevention is just out of the question. And yeah, how to restructure our networks so that it's more effective and less impotent in these cases. So yeah, I would just take it to heart what you said, Vasyl, in terms of like the documenta and all these incredible amount and incredibly smart people coming together and creative people coming together can be an opportunity to think about these questions.
And I would just like to add just one more thought to another kind of structure problem, and I'm thinking out loud here, and it's more of a question. But just to add to what Russell said in terms of the impotency of big institutions, but also the the tiresomeness of horizontal networks. I think it's I hope, but I guess it's also same for the for Heinalka. But I think what somehow has been eating us alive is also our incapabilities in terms of, as a small self, and I'm talking about OFF-Biennale here, as a small self-organized institution, when as a, it's an, and we own a coffee machine, a projector, and a printer, and in what kind. So I feel like another structural problem is that these kind of the small organizations cannot do immediately something because we don't have the capital to react immediately, in situations like this. And I don't maybe what we can. So I think, and this has been eating us alive. And of course, we help as individuals, we help our friends, but that's on an individual level, not on an organizational level. So I don't. So I've been thinking that somehow we need to be aware of the fact that maybe what we can do, it's more in the long term. And I know it's exactly what Vasyl said, that it's it's not the immediate action that it's needed, but it's more of a question of more of a question to think about. And maybe exactly the lumbung and documenta 15, as Vasyl said, could be a platform to do something about this, how also the boundaries of, as most of us have mentioned, the boundaries of the small self-organized initiatives can be quite a bit further, or or just conceptualized in a different way.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions, and I have a small brief comment. Maybe I just share the questions and you can respond as you like. We have still like 20 minutes. And I was hearing you and thinking that in the conversation that we had in preparation to this talk, Vasyl mentioned something that struck me. He talked about how cultural sector is totally gone now in Ukraine. I think Vasyl says something like, we lost our professions, and of course the war inflicted harm on Ukraine's museum and heritage sites. But I think Vasyl was talking about something else. So I have this question in my head, what is a cultural worker in a moment like this? And I think Tanya or Esther also asked last time about how to make sense of our professions. And I feel that it's also related to what Hachnalka said about how to restructure the networks, or what Esther was saying. Okay, I'm going to read these two questions, Okay, and then you can respond as you like. Yes. In your context. And the second question says, would you mind telling a bit more on names of biennales involving as alliance among the post-socialist countries?
Miguel, the first question was inaudible, at least for me. I didn't hear it at all, and the second one was not very clear. Could you please repeat?
Sorry, I'm going to repeat. Okay, the first is
Would it be
the first. Okay, I'm going to repeat the first question. Could you tell us a little bit more about the public reception of both OFF-Biennale and INSTAR in your context? Okay. And the second, I think it is about of more just sharing the names of biennales, the biennale and alliances in the post-socialist countries. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you can start, Camila or Juliana, about the public reception of INSTAR.
It has been very difficult because obviously when the government present you as an enemy of state, you became a space of risk for people, no? And people can feel vulnerable. So part of your work is to reivindicate yourself and reivindicate the being very careful about safety of people, no, but reivindicate dissentment and as a right, no, as a and resistance as a legitimate thing. So this has been hard, but I think it's very for us at least is obvious that the institute have been winning in terms of reception and support, and we are actually, I think, now a reference also because the political context has changed, and in just 2 years the whole country went to the streets. So now dissentment is naturalized, no, and rights have been reivindicated, and people is losing fear to speak and to be themselves. So now the institute, I think, is a space of reference, and also like I said before, no, a refugee for those people who is also marginalized and persecuted. And yeah, we are like I it's very good. It's a reception, no, people know it's like a space or with a legitimate, no, and ethical space, whatever that means. Actually, the second question, there is also a project in Cuba that we support. It was in 2017, and it was also the first independent biennale in Havana ever made, called the 00 Biennale. And it was organized by Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, one artist and activist which is right now in prison in Cuba, the leader of the San Isidro movement, one of a very important group of the civic society in Cuba. And actually we ourselves also have lived and experienced this kind of platform as an art biennale, as also a space to resist and fight for human rights and freedom of speech. And yeah, the reception, I think, is getting better and better. Because people is getting more aware of their situation and are being ready to confront their fear and to expose themselves. And we are there to support that, no? Like a whole network with all the civic society. So
yeah, we were like distributing tools, permissions, new ways of face the situation. So it's kind of in the first time the public acceptance and reception were very indirect, like they no workshops, but then people actually went there, speak to another, and then you can see how the tools we work in the workshop were using in another situation for face some injustice. And yes, it's complicated to measure this because the support is not always direct, because being dissident in this context is not popular. It's
I think Juliana lost connection. I don't know.
We can continue with Esther or Hafnalka. Yeah.
In terms of audience reception, just referring back to the title of this conversation, I think this is what we were trying to do at the beginning, to change the narrative. Before we started OFF-Biennale, in the first years of this government that we still have, the reaction of the democratic opposition, including the progressive art scene, was to protest, to demonstrate against, and to speak about what they don't like about what was being made and done. And that was met with incredible arrogance. And basically none of these social groups managed to get into a dialogic situation with the decision makers. So that was a very frustrating situation that the government very easily translated into their narrative of the previous elite trying to get back into power. And like all the demonstrations, the sitting in Ludwig Museum, and all these efforts being a manifestation of that desperate effort of getting back into power by the previous discredited elite. And so when we started to work, obviously, first of all, it wasn't about going against something, but going for something. And also our communication pretty much was about what we wanted to achieve, it was about the topics and the issues that we thought were important and should be discussed, issues and topics that were kind of sidelined in the mainstream communication. And so it didn't even seem very political, because in our context, being political is always about criticizing. It's a very verbal thing. It's about negative statements. It's about the power, and we didn't speak about the power. We spoke about what we thought were important and what we wanted to achieve. And it was a successful tactic because it presented our efforts, and it presented a story that people actually really liked. It presented an alternative, basically, that even in this kind of highly controlled situation, a very small group of people can initiate something that grows into a large-scale international, I can say high-profile event, and also like a series of collaborations and a lot of cultural production that was unimaginable before without the state. So I think in terms of audience reception, this was the most important message. Hungary, being a kind of top-down society with a relatively, especially in those years, a quite weak civil scene, people didn't really believe in the possibility of doing things differently from what was expected from above. People didn't really think that there was a possibility to reject those compromises that were expected. And I think that this is why they actually quite have liked and still like what we've been doing, because it shows this possibility of just pulling off what you want to achieve and what you stand for. So there has been a kind of a good spirit and an enthusiasm around that, obviously with a lot of constructive and less constructive criticism. But generally that. I think and the other thing I want to add is that very often preaching to the choir is an expression that is like, something less than optimal, or something that is superfluous. And our experience in here in Budapest, being an EU country that is actually quite easy to leave towards the West, I think preaching to the choir is actually quite important, because it's important that we who are still here and try to kind of sustain a certain social discourse, kind of speak to one another and assure each other that we are not alone. So I think that was also part of what we've been doing. But there was another question, so I let Esther address the alliance question.
Yeah. So I'll just start, and then maybe also Vasyl could join in. So also one of the, and this is something we talked a lot about this, particularly with Vasyl as well, the two of us, but also with the alliance in general, that even though we call this East Europe, and it has been a debate for decades, what is Eastern Europe? Is there such a thing? Is it East Central Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe? So what do we call it? But one thing is for sure, that, and what we also try to always state with the alliance, that it's not a homogeneous region. So it has very different contexts. So in Hungary, it's post-socialist, and we have another member from the post-socialist context, or two. It's the Biennale Matter of Art Prague in the Czech Republic, and the Biennale in Warsaw, Biennale Warszawa in Poland. But as we said, and as I mentioned, so the Kiev Biennial, it's and Vasyl is here with us, so it's better if I don't speak in the name of the Kiev Biennial, but there's also the post-Soviet context, and then the last, or our newest member, it's also a post-Soviet, but from the Baltic, from the Baltic region, which is the Survival Kit Festival Riga, which is run by Latvian Center for Contemporary Art. So yeah, these are the names of the biennial, and even though we say so I'm just looking at the chat too. So yeah, so just again shortly, so these are the members, and we have our website. That's the only thing that the East Europe Biennial Alliance owns itself. It's this it's the website. But yeah, and we try to always point out that it's not a homogeneous region, but of course there are many types. And maybe if Vasyl would like to say something about this.
Right, thanks so much. We seems like we run out almost of time. Yeah, I would just add to this that somehow it's not by occasion that these biennial initiatives from exactly this found kind of a common ground, just because so structure-wise, finance-wise, etc. Of course, they are, as Esther pointed out, they may be pretty different, but at the same time, the very basic modus operandi that they share is really what we have very much in common. Also, we are all sort of autonomous in that or another manner, though some of them depend on the respective cities that they represent. Some of us know, we in Kiev, and I think the guys in Budapest too. But also the way we operate, in the sense that we are not this kind of blockbuster biennials, which are very much kind of aimed at making time-wise these huge exhibitions just to show off and stuff. But it's rather research-based, I would say. It's very much grassrooted. So it's indeed we are all independent initiatives, in spite of all contexts that we are, be it post-socialist or post-Soviet ones. Also, it's on purpose sort of called East Europe Biennial Alliance. It's in order to oppose the notion of Central East Europe, which is just a way to go mild, in a way, just to not to use the word East as a pejorative term, because nobody in the so-called Central Europe nobody likes this word. Everybody wants to be in the West or enter this imagined center. Chercher la femme, yeah, whatever it means. But it also, East in this context means that we are extending sort of, or reaching out our purposes and moduses of activities, not only to the East European countries, but also to those semi-peripheral east of Europe, be it the so-called Middle East or North African East. Because obviously, especially again, coming back to the situation that we are in, that it's absolutely obvious that the main processes for this imagined center, for this metropolis, takes exactly in the peripheries, in the eastern peripheries with regards to Europe. So this is a decisive region in that regard, and a decisive moment of time. So in this sense, we are in a perfect revolutionary situation. We are in a proper time and in a proper place. We just have to act.
Thank you. Thank you. And we ran out of time. I just wanted to say thank you, Esther, Hafnalka, Camila, Juliana, and Vasyl, for this fantastic conversation, this very honest conversation that poses important questions around our practices as cultural workers. I just wanted to add that I just wanted to say thank you as well to Undine Schaffer, interpreter, and Lilian Astrid Kiss for the simultaneous translation into German. This video will be made available online soon, both in English and German. The next episode of this series will take place on Sunday, 10th of April. Our details will be available on Documenta 15 website and social media channels very soon. Again, thank you so much. It was really special, and yeah, hope to see you soon.
Dum daga ding dang daga daga dum daga ding dang dang daga daga dum dang dang daga daga dum daga daga brang.